Ralph H. Baer. The 2004 National Medal of Technology is awarded to Ralph H. Baer for his groundbreaking and pioneering creation, development, and commercialization of interactive video games, which spawned related uses, applications, and mega industries in both the entertainment and education realms.
Good morning or good day. My name is Mark W. Baer. I'm Ralph Baer's son. Ralph Baer, who is known as the father of video games, and we'll get into that. But hello, Italian video game players. Thank you for watching. Sure, I'll be happy to. Father's name was Ralph Henry Baer. He passed a few years ago. He was born Ralph Heinrich Baer in Germany, and he escaped the Nazis, the fascists, when he was a teenager and got out just in time, about 6 weeks before they closed the borders. He came to America, and long story short, after World War II, he was a GI, American GI in World War II. He went into electronics, early television, radio, and so forth. And he ended up coming up with an idea. He really thought of it first in the 1950s, but then really came together in the 1960s to use televisions to do other things besides just stare at it. So instead of just staring at the television, people would interact with it. And a lot of these words weren't even in existence back then. Interactivity and video games. These words didn't really exist in the 60s. But he thought, well, I can do something with television besides just look at it. So he created a system for interacting with television to do many things, including playing games, testing, like taking tests like you were at university, and many other things, including interactive purchasing over the television. We would look at an ad, and then you would call into the company and they would ship it to you. But most of these ideas that Ralph came up with in the 50s and 1960s, it was way too early. So the main thing that happened was he made you can see it behind me, a machine that allowed people to play games on their television, not with just one person, but with at least two people with the hand controllers. And this was he wrote the idea down in 1966, and he came up with the first prototypes by about 1967, 68. And by 1969, he had made a movie to show this and demonstrate it. This is long before, 1966 for sure is almost 10 years, 7, 8 years before the industry really took off. So, in short, he's considered the father of video games because he's the first one to come up with the idea of using your television as an interactive device to play multiple games with multiple people in multiple settings. So, and from that point, the industry took off. Yes, but yes and no. Yes, I do have some stories, but not as much as you would think. And I'll go with the no part first and then the yes part. So when you're a little kid, I'm 7, 8, 9 years old, you don't really think of much of this. Adults didn't know what was going to happen, much less kids. So yes, I visited him at his company where he worked, which was called Sanders Associates in New Hampshire, which is a state in New Hampshire. And I visited him there. But that company mostly did defense work, rockets, radar, sonar, these kinds of things. And so what my dad did is he came up with the idea. He built a very, very crude prototype, and then he took a couple of people from his group, because he was a manager, and he put them in a room off to the side, a secret room, and they developed this brown box in secret originally, because it wasn't part of his regular job. It wasn't part of the company, and he did it on the side. So I didn't know about it. The company didn't even know about it at first. And so I saw what he did for the defense contracting. You know, as a little kid, I can remember seeing, they used to have these, they would take and make electronics, and they would try to shrink it and shrink it and shrink it, because that was the whole idea. I mean, now we have cell phones and we think everything's tiny, but back in those days, things were huge, right? Huge, electronics, huge. And so I saw him do that, but I didn't see the brown box until a little later. Now, I did see it long before it came out as a product. He would bring home to our house prototypes. So this may go beyond your question, but he brought home little prototypes, and we would play them on the television as kids. So he had a little black and white TV, and it was hooked up to the TV. And I remember the TV because it had a little thing where you hold the shoes underneath, because this is old TV. This is 1960s. And you would turn the TV on by pulling the button, and we'd have a little box, and you'd play the games on the box. And it could have been many different kinds of games. Because in the end, tennis, right? Table tennis, ping pong, that's what took off. But there were many other ones early on that just in the end weren't as popular. So I remember playing those as a kid. And I remember playing my brother as a kid with those games. And as I like to point out, I usually won. In fact, I may have always won. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure. I always kicked his behind. Or I like to say that. That part I didn't document, but I'm pretty sure I usually beat him. I can beat him now, I promise you that. But anyway, so that's it. So I did see his office, I did see his work, but I didn't see the product until it was already coming together later on. Well, there were different values at different times, of course, but he did teach us to work hard and to, pursue what we liked and what was good for us. I mean, I am not an engineer. I'm an attorney, so I don't have that. I don't have that electronics or engineering or technical ability that he had. But he was also uniquely smart. I mean, he spoke multiple languages and could play music, and that just happens. That just happens, and it doesn't. It just happens that he was very smart, and he had a unique ability which I don't have. But he did teach us to pursue what we like to do, go after what we like to go after, and to work hard. I think he set a good example just by what he did, right? By working hard, working constantly, and and pursuing what he wanted to do, and to think a little bit differently, not necessarily think of the same thing all the time, and to move in new directions. But he was an old school father. I mean, he was from Germany originally, and discipline and to a certain degree. I mean, not like a modern American father, which is just like, yeah, whatever, just go ahead, see you later. He's good man. I used this document. It was called Ralph Baer Firsts, and the different sorts of things that he did before video games and even after video games. So for example, before video games, he had designed an automatic parachute that, if based upon the altimeter setting, so how high you were off the ground or how low, the parachute would automatically deploy. That's one example. After video games, an example was Simon, the little round game that you follow. It has colors and noises, and it was fashioned after Simon Says. And so you would push the little buttons. So when you would follow it as a visual and also an auditory sequence. you would do that. So he had many, many things, and those are just a couple of examples. Oh, I have one more example here for you. So he was very inventive. I think this is after video games, but you know, he had a little. I still have this. It's called an auto buddy talking compass. So, for example, just for fun, he would build something like this. He may have tried to market it. I don't know, but you turn it on and you point it in one direction. And I don't know if you can hear that, but it tells you what direction you're facing. And so it was just a fun little toy that he built. He may have built this as a standalone toy for kids. He may have built it as a real directional machine. If this was built 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, you know, people didn't carry compasses, so you could be out hiking and you wanted to go to the north or you want to go to the east, and you'd use this. So I'm not sure the context of this, but this is the sort of thing he would build just for fun. He certainly was ahead of his time. So this sort of thing, you know, whenever he built it, which I'm sure this, just by looking at the print, it looks like, you know, it's old font. This is probably in the 80s or 70s. So, you know, this wasn't the kind of thing that people had. So he's like, well, let's just build it. And maybe he marketed it, maybe somebody else marketed it. All I know is I have a nice toy. Yes, I'm very proud of him. Here's why it was the first commercial video game. In fact, it was really the first video game of any kind in the way we think about video games now. Before him, people did build games on oscilloscopes, right? Or they built games on supercomputers, PSP-1, for example. In fact, happened right here in the city that I'm sitting in, Salt Lake. And people played games on electronic machines. It's true. I mean, but people have been playing games for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, whether it's with sticks or it's with an oscilloscope or it's Benjamin Franklin with a kite, you know, seeing what happens in a thunderstorm. So he wasn't the first person to think of a game, of course, or electronic games. No. But the idea of putting it all together was what was so unique and so revolutionary, because before the idea of putting it on your television, nobody had thought about this whole concept of interactivity with multiple players and a system like this brown box that you can see that would be used and sold, you know, to not one person or two people in a lab, but to thousands and eventually millions and millions of people. So that's what made it so revolutionary and so groundbreaking. What is very interesting to me today is when people think about it, especially the young people who are watching this, they'll think, oh, this was always there, you know? The car was always there. This was always there. No, it wasn't. I have a clip, a video clip, that shows an American television show in the 1970s where they were trying to guess what this was. And even when that was explained to them in around 1973, 1974, they had no idea what they were looking at. No idea whatsoever. This interactive gaming and the system and all that. It was so revolutionary and new. Now, had they been shown maybe a supercomputer and you played a game on it, maybe they would have said, oh, there you go, there's a supercomputer and there's a game. But the idea of using your television, and now it's any device, right? It can be a cell phone, it can be a tablet, it can be a computer. But back then, it was only televisions, right? So the idea of using that to play games and to do things was revolutionary. And it took off from there. So yeah, he's a revolutionary. He was the first one to really come up with that whole system. Would other people have done it eventually? Sure, of course, but it would have been different. It probably would have come from computers and then go to televisions. Or it would have come from cell phones perhaps and gone to computers and televisions. But he was 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, coming up with this idea, 60 years ago. So, pretty interesting guy. Absolutely, yes. So he said this about not just the video game industry, but all industries. He would say, for him, particularly coming up with the idea, building the idea, that was relatively the easy part. Yeah, it took time and you had to work on it, but he had an engineer's brain and he could think like this. The hard part was convincing other people that this was a good idea, or this was a good product, or this would catch on. And then, even then, getting it to market is very difficult. The document I'll send you about his new products or new ideas, that's maybe 100, whatever, 75, 100, maybe a little bit more. He came up with many hundreds of ideas, but to get them to market, to get somebody to believe in it, that was the hard part. To get somebody to invest money to build these things was the hard part. So the engineering part for him, the imagination part, that came relatively easy. Getting the money, getting the support, getting the marketing, that was the hard part. You see, if I can back up just for a second, a lot of people like myself, maybe we can talk. Other people are good engineers. Other people are good thinkers. You know, they think of new things. But it's rare to have those qualities in one person. And he did really have those qualities in one person. Although he wasn't the best businessman. And that's why he's probably not that well known, right? Because he didn't market himself and he didn't go out and he didn't promote himself. But he was able to have the imagination and the technical skill at the same time. And those are generally separate. You know, it's the left side, right side of the brain sort of thing. So that's what made it unique. And made him able to do these things, these interesting things. My dad was sitting at the Port Authority, which is a building in New York, to catch a bus. And he had worked for television companies before. He's now already working for Sanders, which is a defense contractor. But he had worked for television companies, actually building televisions, because back in those days, they built televisions in places like the United States or Europe, not all in the Far East. And he sat down, he was waiting for the bus, and he wrote down all of his ideas about playing with the television. And in fact, as you know by looking at the document, it doesn't say video games, it says TV games, because nobody had come up with that term yet, video games. And we've thought about that over time. We're not 100% sure where the idea came up from, but think about this. The old televisions had two inputs in the back. They had an audio input and they had a video input. And you hooked up this brown box, or the prototype, to the back of your television. You hooked it up through the audio and the video. Well, the early ones didn't even have sound. So it went through the video input. And video is also a word for visual. You can see things, so you use the word video for visual rather than audio for auditory. So someplace along the way, it goes in through the video system input, and also video is visual. At some point, the document which says TV games got translated to the term video games. And that just caught on, because it really is video games, because it's not just on your TV, it's on your tablet, it's on your computer, it's on all things. But anyway, so back to the document. So on September 1st, 1966, he sits down and he writes down all of his ideas, at least all of them that he had at that point, onto this document. And he writes down, you're gonna play games, you're gonna do testing, you're going to do all kinds of different things on your television, more than just stand and look at it. So anyways, he writes this document down. That became a very important document later on, when other people might have claimed that they had the idea before him or at the same time as him, because bottom line, nobody can produce a document. Nobody can produce a document that's before September 1st, 1966, that outlines the industry like that does. Right? So that's why it's so important. And the original is in the Smithsonian, in the American History Museum, along with his lab and so forth, and the original brown box. Again, yes and no. Yes, he saw a lot of what was going to happen, and the proof is in that document. The proof is in the September 1, 1966 document, which, by the way, he marked in European style because he was German, and in engineering style, 1 September 66, right? That's not how we do it here in the States, but that's how you do it in Europe and how he grew up doing it. So he did foresee a lot of things in that document, but he would admit, and I think anybody who is really fair about it, would admit, you could never see all of this. You couldn't see the iPhone and all the games you could play on on smartphones. You couldn't see all this. You couldn't see all the manifestations. And some of the things, frankly, he didn't like that happened from his creation. He didn't like the violence in the new games. He did not like the violence. He wanted this to be a family thing. He really thought of it as, if you look at the old advertisements for Magnavox Odyssey, which was the commercial product of the brown box, you'll see it's families sitting down and playing together, families having fun, families laughing. The families are not taking a knife out and stabbing each other on the screen, as it were. And he had lived through World War II, right? Both as had to escape and then as a GI in the American Army. So he saw real violence, and he did not want to really be a part of that. But things take on their own life. He knew that. I mean, you can't control it. Once it's out there, it's out there. And he wouldn't want to control it. But I'm sure he wished there was less violence and more education and more fun games. But honestly, there's lots of fun games. There's lots of education games. So I'm sure he's very happy with that. What happened, both when he was alive and now, I would imagine, wherever he is, he'd be very happy with it. Just parts of it, yeah, but that's life, right? Yes, indeed. He held over 150 US and foreign patents, including some very early patents, the first video game patent. And by that time, they were calling it video games. So it says on the patent, the 580 and a couple of others, video games. So somewhere in between, and we don't have to get into all those details, it's called video games. But he had many, many others. And I know you wanted to find out about some of those. So here's one I pulled up special for today. We call this the 873 because a lot of times with patents, you refer to it from the last three numbers. This is, patent 4,710,873. And what was really neat about this patent is that it talked about, and it was in 1984, so it's a little bit later, but it talked about digitizing faces, taking people's faces and sticking them into games. I mean, this is what's done all the time now. You go to get an NFL, National Football League, American football game, and it has the faces of the actual players. You go European soccer, you get the real faces, right? You don't get a cartoon face. I mean, you can, but you can also get the real faces. Well, they thought of this back then. The interesting thing about this patent is the original patent doesn't even have his name on it. He was the engineer, and you'll see in the body that he's mentioned. He had to insert his name back in later because they left him off. Intentionally? Maybe. I mean, this is you said the hard part of getting this stuff to market. All kinds of things happen along the way. Other people maybe want to take the credit for it, and there's plenty of credit to go around. It's not like he's the only guy. I mean, these other people did have input. But the 873 patent, which digitizes faces and puts them into games, was like revolutionary at the time. And that was one that he worked on, had to add his name into the patent later. In fact, we tried to get some licensing out of this, but it didn't happen. It's another example of how the engineer just kind of gets forgotten. He builds it, he comes up with the idea of sticking somebody's face in it, and then the lawyers get a hold of it, and other people get a hold of it, and it takes off. So that's just one example. He had many other patents, whether it's video games or other things about interactivity and so forth. There's a variety of reasons it came about. I became friendly with the director of the museum in my hometown, which is Manchester, New Hampshire. And that museum likes to honor people in that town. It's not a big city. It's 100,000 people, plus or minus. But that's really where he lived most of his life in the United States. After he came here and he lived in New York at first, and then they moved up to New Hampshire. And that's where I was born and the kids were raised. So, and New Hampshire had a big tech industry because it was part of Boston, really. In the 1960s, 1970s, companies like DEC, a digital equipment company, and many others, Honeywell, were really big in that area. And then the industry kind of collapsed or shrunk, and a lot of it went to California, right? Silicon Valley. So the idea was to honor both my dad and the electronics industry in that area, and to bring some attention, and also bring some attention to the museum, which is a block away. And it was a perfect setting, and the mayor was into it, and you know, and it turned out there was a couple by the name of the Hitchcocks, and they had made a lot of money in computers, not so much video games, but in computers, and they really admired my dad and his name and his history, rather, and what he had accomplished. So they put a lot of time and money into it, and the rest of us put a lot of time and some money into it, and they came up with the idea of honoring him on the bench, and a nice little plaque, and it kind of honors the company, him, the town, the industry, and history. Because a lot of your young viewers, you know, you don't know history. I mean, it's okay. It happens all the time, right? I mean, but it's nice to remember who brought us here, right? I mean, we stand on the shoulders of giants. That's an old expression. I didn't come up with it. We do. We stand on the shoulders of giants and other people who have come up with things. And he's one of those people. And that area is one of the areas where that kind of industries started, you know. The Industrial Revolution came to that area very early in the 1800s. And the mill yard did things like fabric and shoes and leather. And then it eventually moved into electronics. And so this was a way to honor him and the area and the industry. And in fact, we dedicated that plaza in May, about 2 years ago. Next year, 2022, we're going to do a rededication of that plaza because that will be the 100th birthday, Ralph's 100th birthday. So for that, we're going to rededicate the plaza. Hopefully we can get the mayor and maybe the governor, who knows? Politicians, they come if they want to. If they're up for election, they'll show up, right? I hope they come, but we'll get local people to come and maybe a couple of, you know, newspapers to honor him and again to honor the area. So we're going to do that. I think we haven't picked a date yet. His birthday's in March 8th, 2022 will be his 100th birthday. We'll probably do it in May because March, the weather in New England, it can be really bad. It can be rainy, freezing rain, snow. So I think we'll do it in May. It'll be pretty, spring, flowers, and so forth. But anyways, so we'll rededicate that plaza May 2022. If you're coming over from Italy, for example, feel free, let me know. We'll get a nice seat for you. We'll put it right up front. Yeah, I'll send a formal invitation. When I get the invitations, you'll be sure to be on the list. And once you're there, you can go to Boston, which is close, New York, which isn't too far away. And then, of course, you want to go to Washington, D.C., and see the museum, where this is the picture here. That's the picture, the rendition, before they built it, of his lab, which is in the Smithsonian. And not just his lab. I mean, the Smithsonian is incredible. There's like 6 different museums. There's a new African American history museum. There's a native North American museum. There's the Air and Space Museum, which is really amazing, you know, Apollo and moonshot. In fact, my brother built a telescope that went on so my brother got the engineering gene. He built a telescope that went on a mission to Pluto called New Horizons. And so if you go to the Air and Space Museum and you go in there, there's a replica, because of course it's gone, but there's a reproduction of that telescope on the New Horizons spacecraft, and it's hanging from the ceiling. So I can go on one side and see my brother, and I can go to the other side of the mall and see my dad. I'm nowhere to be found. I'm confused about that, but I'm nowhere. But there's my dad and there's my brother. So you can go to Manchester, then you can go to Boston, you can go to New York. Everybody needs to go to New York. It is an amazing city. And then you can go down to Washington, D.C. and see these things. Oh, and by the way, Boston has an Italian North End to die for. The Italian North End of Boston is beautiful. The restaurants are fantastic. They are, because they're actually real Italians who come over and they set up restaurants in the North End of Boston. Clearly, the National Medal of Technology, which is given by the President of the United States, is a very big one, very big. And so that's important. And that gave him national, even international recognition, right? George Lucas happened to be in the same year, the same group. Yeah, there was about 8 or 10 or 12 people who got it that year, because not every year, but most years. And George Lucas was in that group, which was kind of interesting because he wasn't really a scientist. He's not a technologist, but he inspired millions of people. So it makes sense. And so I think that one was very important. There's an organization called IEEE, which is a group of engineers, electronic engineers. And that's very important to him. And he got the Edison Award from IEEE. And he got, I think it's called the Abuka Mazura Award. He was the founder of Sony. I may have mispronounced that name, but he got that award, and those were important. And then he became a fellow, which is a very narrow group of people. It's like the engineers, and he got the fellowship in IEEE. You can look up IEEE. And that was important to him. He was inducted into the Inventors Hall of Fame, which is the United States USPTO. Patent and Trademark Office, United States Patent and Trademark Office, and that's in just over the river in Virginia from Washington, D.C. So he was inducted into that. I know he really enjoyed that. So many awards. I know that Sanders, which is now BAE, they awarded him, prestigious awards for being, a successful engineer and quite frankly, making them millions of dollars. Again, the engineers make the thing, the companies make the money. It's just how it works. So I think that was important. But the national medal, I think, is right up there at the top, and then the others from that. Not that he enjoyed them all, and they were important, but that was a big deal. You don't get invited to the White House as an American. You don't get invited to the White House very often, unless you're some special occasions. It's a unique opportunity. It's like getting an audience with the Pope for you. I mean, how that's hard. It's impossible, really. But just that one time. Yes. The perfect example is actually I think it's in that September document. It's certainly in some of the other documents at the time. Now, it has become a huge success, but it didn't at the time. If there is a long video, a long movie that you can pull up on YouTube. If you put in Baer, B-A-E-R, Harrison, H-A-R-R-I-S-O-N. There's a short version which just shows him playing the game. But if you just put in Baer and Harrison, it'll pull up the 30-minute video, the 30-minute movie. And in that, the brown box wasn't called a brown box. He called it the all-purpose box. So the idea was you would see an advertisement on TV, you would plug your phone, because back then you'd have a telephone, and you would put it into what's called a modem, and I want to buy this thing that I see on TV, and you would send that information via the modem to the advertiser, and they would ship it in the U.S. mail to your house. Well, we now know that process is Amazon, right, or all the other online sellers. But this is 1960s. Nobody had any idea how to do that in the 60s. I mean, or could see the vision. He knew how to do it. But nobody else could see the vision of using your television to give you information, and immediately you take it, you put it into a machine, it sends out the order, and they ship it to you. Boom, like that. I mean, credit cards were brand new back then. Credit cards only came around in the early 60s. So people were not familiar with credit cards, much less that. So there's a perfect example. It did become a product, and a huge product, obviously. It's the biggest retailing phenomenon on the planet now. I mean, more people shop on their computers than they do in stores, at least in North America, at least in the pandemic, right? But it didn't happen for him. That the all-purpose box didn't get built commercially. The brown box did. Odyssey did. So that's history. That's how it goes. Oh, funny is in the eye of the beholder. So it's hard to say about funny stories. Let me think. I mean, he used to like to sail, and I remember the one time we were sailing, I was probably 5 or 6 years old, maybe 7, and we dumped. We went over, and I was playing a joke on him, so he, you can imagine how afraid you are when you go into the lake with your boat, and your little kid goes in the water, and he was calling out for me, and I didn't answer, because, just, let's see what happens. If my kid did that to me, a knuckle sandwich, But, I mean, it's funny looking back. It was funny for me. I was a little kid, like, you won't know where I am. because he was on one side of the boat and I was on the other side of the boat. In looking back, I'm sure it was frightening, but it's funny now. It was funny for me at the time, you know, a little kid, mischievous. Oh yeah, especially when he got older, because when he got older, people started to recognize him, at least people in the electronics industry, in the video games history, would recognize him, and people started to write books about him. So we went around North America and all through Europe. I don't think we made it to Italy. I wish we had, but we got invitations we were in Paris, we were in Utrecht, Netherlands. We were in many cities in Germany, of course, because that's where he was born and raised. Pirmasens is where he was born. Cologne is where he was, Köln was where he was raised, but he also lived in a little town called Guben, and many towns. So they would have video game conferences and invite him over, and he would play. He would play with the mayor. He would play with whoever was running. He would play with me. He was very good. He usually win. He almost always won against adults, but against kids he always lost. It was very cute. He did that in Washington too. Little kid would come up. Little kid could have an arm in a cast, you know, and he'd win. But if he played the mayor, like the mayor of Utrecht came out, and he would kind of like, sorry, mayor, because he was good at it. So I did play a lot with him, but more later in life than when younger. Younger, you know, he was an engineer and he was business and he was working. I mean, we tested it together, but I wouldn't say we played extensively. I mean, we were little kids, and even when we got to be teenagers, you know, you do your own thing as a teenager, and he did his thing. Ralph came up with a dance pad, electronic dance pad, back in the 80s and 90s. When he worked for the company, which was called, out of Chicago, this company actually on the 873 patent, he did some dance pads, electronic dance pads with them too. Marvin Glass is the name of the company. He was a consultant for Marvin Glass for 20 years plus or minus. And Marvin Glass was the one who came up with Simon. I should have brought one today, but I didn't, sorry. The one who came up with Simon and many other games, including digitizing faces and so forth. But yeah, he did a dance pad. It's kind of fun. No, I never danced with him, sorry. No, neither one of us could probably dance, so that explains that. I know I can't. I don't know much. I know that my dad reached out to him once, but he didn't get much of a response, my understanding. But they were really until modern times, they were on separate tracks. I mean, my dad did his thing and he did his thing. So I don't think, now, my dad, Ralph did get in contact with Al Alcorn. Al Alcorn was the engineer who built the Atari machines. He was really the on-the-ground guy. In fact, I met him after my dad passed at a large ceremony in Las Vegas honoring engineers and so forth. And we sat at the table with each other. And I do recall looking at him, because it was a big deal. It was like a red carpet deal, kind of like a Hollywood deal. And, and Al Alcorn got his award, and then I got the award for my dad posthumously on his behalf. And I turned to Al and I said, could you imagine this ever happening, when you were building these things? And he says, of course not. I mean, nobody, who could imagine this? And it's the same thing as the 1966 document. I mean, you ask, could he imagine all this stuff? No. I mean, if somebody who built an internal combustion engine, could they imagine that Apollo went to the moon, right? Or that the New Horizons went past Pluto? No. Could the Wright brothers believe that we have supersonic planes that can get you from Milan to New York in 6 or 7 or 8 hours? Of course not. They were lucky if they could get to the other side of the field, like nosing in, right? So yeah, so he had a relationship with Al Alcorn and a couple of the other people from that company, whose name is not coming to me at the moment, but in fact, got quite friendly with some of them, and but back in the day they were in separate worlds. So they only came together when the Atari machine came out, and it was really after Mr. Bushnell had come to a demonstration of the brown box. He had seen it, gone back, Al Alcorn re-engineered it, and built these other machines. And it was very successful. I mean, let's not let's not give credit where it's due. I mean, that company and the Atari took off and helped build the industry in ways that nobody could see in 1966 or what have you, or the 50s when my dad was thinking about this stuff. So there's a lot of credit to go around. They did a lot of good things. They just weren't first. Pursue your passion. If that's your passion, do it, right? And have fun with it. And try to think about new ways to do it, right? Maybe new games, new characters. Hopefully, new ways to teach people things. I mean, it's a fantastic medium where people can be taught some very positive things. Obviously, they can be taught very negative things too. I mean, it's like anything. You can pick up a book, or you can pick up a document, it could say really nice things, it could say really terrible things. But I would say pursue your passion. If that's your passion, do it. It's very different now, obviously, than it was 50 or 60 years ago. And Ralph would say that, 50, 60 years ago, one guy, two guys, three guys, they could put together a whole system, right? Now it's hundreds of people, sometimes more, and millions of dollars to develop these very intricate games, with little secret passages and little keys and little hidden things and hidden meetings and new levels. So it's a little different in that way. Probably, I guess you could say the easy stuff has been done, right? I mean, the easy stuff has been done, and now it's more complicated. That's just like anything. I mean, the easy cars were built 150 years ago. The cars they build now, not so easy. They're complicated. But that's how life is. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I mean, you should just pursue it and have fun with it and enjoy yourself and don't get discouraged, We all get discouraged. I mean, if I pursued it, I would have been totally discouraged because I can't do that stuff. I'm not good with electronics. I'm not good with engineering things. So that's why I'm an attorney, right? Now, whether I'm a good at an attorney or not, who knows? It's not for me to say. But go, pursue your passion. I think you'll enjoy it. You see, I think one thing that my dad, Ralph, would have really enjoyed and did enjoy when he was alive is to see the happiness in people's faces when they play these things. I mean, he really enjoyed it, especially kids. Now, would he like to see these leagues where people are in their basement for 36 hours and never come out, and it's not good for their health, it's not good for their mind? No, of course not. But to see kids light up, to see adults light up and have fun with it, I absolutely love that. So that's what I suggest you do. Have fun with it. There's a gentleman by the name of Lenny Herman. And Lenny Herman wrote these series of video game books called Phoenix, The Rise and Fall of Video Games and so forth. And I think Lenny might have been the first person, but there were maybe people around him too that it wasn't my dad who came up with the title of the father of video games. I mean, he just built something. He brought it to his company, which didn't even have any idea what he was doing. And they weren't even in that business. And then they sold it, the rights to Magnavox, and the Magnavox licensed the Nintendos, Colecos, Ataris, and so forth, Sonys of this world. And then all this money came to the company kind of out of the blue. So but when Lenny, and others called him the father of video games, I think that was, especially as he got older, I mean, I think anybody can identify, as you get older, you like to think you've made a difference, right? And you've helped somebody along the way, and in this case, a big lot of somebody's. I might help one or two or five people along the way, but he hopefully helped millions of people along the way. So to be recognized in that fashion as having been at the foundation of a worldwide industry and having really made a difference and shown what can be done, especially as a refugee, right? I mean, coming from a country where he would have probably not survived the war, and to come from that and be able to do what he did. I mean, it is a testament to a certain degree of this country and the United States and what it's been able to do over the years for all the faults of this country. It does bring people in and give them opportunity. I mean, the greatest electronic car company now is Tesla, at the moment anyway, and that's Elon Musk. Well, he's not from the United States, from Australia originally. And that idea of being able to come here and strike out and do something really revolutionary and new, I think that knowing that he did that gave him a lot of satisfaction and made him very happy. And hopefully your Italian people, your Italian players and people in this industry and around this industry, you don't have to be here physically anymore. We can do everything on a computer. you get that kind of inspiration to reach out and create new things like he did. I mean, look, we're thousands of miles away from each other. You don't have to be in that place anymore. I mean, back in the day you did. So here we are. I have a few gadgets here. I think I've showed you this one before, but it just gives you an idea of Ralph's creativity and fun. Back in the day, nobody had cell phones, nobody had smartphones, nobody had digital equipment where you could do all this stuff. Your cars didn't tell you where to go or when to go or what direction. So he made this machine, and I'm not 100% sure if it was just a toy or if it was a serious machine. You turn it on, and you can point it, and it tells you what direction you go. Heading south. Now, for any of you who might be able to, track where I am right now, they're off by a little bit. I have to be honest. Has to be recalibrated, but he's not here to recalibrate it. So, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. Let's see. That's northwest. Yeah, that's west. So he says northwest. Close enough. So he built machines like this, and very charming. And it was for kids. So what else? So I also have here. This is the rendition of his lab at the Smithsonian, which they gave us these pictures, renditions before they built it, and I had him sign this particular one. So that's a nice keepsake. We can do that. What else do I have here? This is a reproduction brown box. There's a few of them in existence, not a whole lot. One of the original reproductions that he had made is in the Smithsonian. They actually put that out in the display because they don't want to put the original out because the lights will degrade it and make it worse. But this one can be plugged in. You can see in the back here, it can be plugged into a modern television, and you can play all of the original games on this. You can just take these different knobs and you can reconfigure them to do different games. They're all ball and paddle games. In other words, they're lines with little balls that intersect each other. So it might be volleyball, it might be ping pong, it might be tennis, it could be hockey. Because back in those days, they didn't have a lot of memory. So a hockey game, for example, would just be the ball, but you would put a plastic overlay that you would physically tape to your television. It looked like a hockey rink. So then the ball went in the goal. All right, so I have the brown box here. There's a few of them around. They're fun to play with, by the way. They're really fun because it's retro gaming, which is something. Oh, a shout out to your players. Do some retro gaming. Simple tennis, ping pong, volleyball. I mean, I know you can be complicated and you can go to Zelda and she can go to some funny planet and have some funny clothes on. But sometimes it's just fun to just play good old simple stuff. It's like a piece of bread with butter. Sometimes that's all you need. Do you need a 5-course meal? Maybe, some days, but not always. Oh, let me show you one more thing. Oh, so here's a picture of I don't have it with me, but that's a picture of the Simon, right? This is the Simon that I was talking about earlier that he built. This would beep, and you'd follow the pattern, it's like Simon says. So this is New Hampshire High Tech Council posthumously gave him an award, and so he was the kind of like the keynote guy for that particular year for the awards. And so there you go. But just to show you how things can get a little bit confused, if you turn over this, it shows Pac-Man or what's her name? It's the gal. Yeah, but it's the gal. And that and that had nothing to do with each other, okay? But they do now, right? I mean, this is just how history is. Things get conflated. So there's that. And then there's the other thing I brought up that's his book that he did, which I need to get to a second edition. And it has in the back a list of the many things he did, like Chat Mat, there's that, and this little Video Buddy. Video Buddy was a great one, where you could talk and his mouth, where is he? Right here. His mouth would move. His mouth would move, and and the information would come from your television or your computer later on. Okay. Oh, here's one that you really should be aware of: the light gun. That he did come up with, the light gun. So what it is down here, you can see, it's one of the early prototypes of a light gun. Because in World War II, he was a small arms expert. He knew about being an engineer. He knew how to take arms apart and put them back together. And he used to teach other GIs, other guys in the Army, how to use captured armament or how to defuse captured armament, because that was big. And in fact, that expertise probably kept him off the front line, kept him alive. In all likelihood. So he was familiar with arms, even though he was an old school guy. He doesn't believe in the violence of this stuff, but he had a lot of fun with it. So what it was just a little light sensor in the front of the gun, whether it was a handgun or a rifle, and the light sensor could detect the frequency of the light on your television. So if you got the right frequency, you hit the target, and the information would go to the brown box, and it would, off it would go, or whatever it would do to show you that you hit the target. And if you hit the wrong frequency, well then it didn't pick it up and you missed the target. So he came up with that right at the beginning. That was the 60s. He came up with the idea of the light gun. And there's a lot of manifestations of that now. A lot of different, whether it's a gun or a handgun or just one of those sort of Star Wars looking things. But that's it. So those are the main things I brought today. The book, this, the rendition, the little toy here. Most of his things are his toys, and that's what he did with his Marvin Glass Company. Most of those toys are at the Strong Museum. J.P. Dyson, who we talked about before, we gave a shout out to and said hi, who was here just before me. He has most of this. His museum has most of the actual toys, and there is a little dedicated space for Ralph in that particular museum. And whatever else I might have, I don't have here. It's in storage or what have you. This was the Inventors Hall of Fame induction. This was, the little thing you have around your neck. He had around his neck, when he was inducted into the USPTO. And I had him sign it. Every once in a while, I'd have him sign something. Why I didn't have him sign everything, I don't know. I wasn't thinking. But he did sign this one, which is kind of cute. And, this is that Las Vegas one, Dice, that I was telling you about, that I met Al Alcornet. And this is the one, Lemelson Center, that's where the lab is. But there was one more that I thought you'd really find interesting. So there's and I had him sign this one for whatever reason. It's called Videogames Live. And there's a gentleman by the name of Tommy Tellerico. This is a nice Italian name for you. Tommy Tellerico is a composer, and he makes music for the games. And he's made many. He's fairly well known and famous over here, at least. And he has a group that he'll travel around the world. My guess is he's been to Italy. I know he's been all through Europe. He's been to the Far East. He's been here to Salt Lake City. And he will play the music of the video game, and the big screen will show the game. And of course, people who really know this stuff, on the first note, they know what he's doing. So my dad would be a guest. He'd be a secret guest for this. And he would pull them out, and he'd go out. I'll send you that. It's on YouTube. You could find it. And he and Bill Harrison would come out together, and they'd play on a reproduction brown box. Very cute, very sweet. And the kids would go wild. And all I did was drive him there and drive him back. I was the chauffeur. That's all I did. But but this is one of my favorite, because Videogames Live. He did that probably live. He did it half a dozen times, maybe more, maybe 10. But I think video, he did it many times, because Tommy would be wherever. He'd be in San Francisco. He'd be in Mexico City. He'd be wherever he was. And my dad would get on the video like this and say, "Hi, everyone. If I could leave you just with one thought, if I could leave one thought, you might like this, you might not. It's up to you, of course. But you know, the world is a big place and it's a complicated place, and there are different stories out there. But I think the great takeaway from my dad's life is that you can really make a difference. You can do new and interesting things. You don't have to be, I mean, it would help to be Albert Einstein, right? It would help to be, you know, William Shakespeare or whomever. But, you know, you can do really good things. And he was a very humble man in the end. I mean, I try to get the word out probably more than he did because he was an engineer, you know, and that's what he did. But I like it because it's a good legacy. It's also a very good story, and it's hopefully inspirational to people to get out there and do new things and do fun things. And, you know, a lot of times he didn't succeed. You'll see from the list of things, it's like, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, but this happened, right? And that's a big deal. And maybe your deal won't be as big. I mean, my deal will never be as big, but there's always something that we can contribute if we think about it and kind of reach for it. So that's the thought I would like to leave you with. Let me do a shout out to the Videogame Parties Italy group and all you video game players out there in Italy. You know, thank you for watching this. Thank you for playing video games. Have fun with it. I'm sure my dad would be very, very, I know he would be, and he was when he was alive, so I'm sure wherever he is, he's very happy to know that you're out there, you're having fun, you're doing positive things. And a great shout out to you, and keep playing.